think there's more that Taiwan can do in the area of civil defense that would help things. I think that one idea for Taiwan to consider is gun ownership and access to guns. If you really want a vigorous civil defense, I think that's an important debate to have. Democracies trust the people, and some of this is sort of residual from the Baisa Kongbu period, the martial law period, and it doesn't necessarily have to be an American Second Amendment model, but it could be something like a Swiss model.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Freedom is Not Free and 新闻硬邦邦 channels. Right now I'm in Washington, D.C., and I have a pleasure and an honor to interview Piero Tozzi from the CECC, Congressional Executive Commission on China. Piero, thank you so much for agreeing to take part in today's show.
Sure. Well, thank you, Stan. I know you do some good work, and you have a podcast that really is popular in Taiwan.
Yeah.
So great to be on your show. Thank you.
And we hope for the Taiwanese audiences to hear more about American politics and the current developments within the Washington, D.C. So let's talk about CECC a little bit. Yeah. For viewers that might not be familiar with it, what is the mission of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, and how does it work, influence U.S. policy?
Sure. Well, the Congressional Executive Commission on China really goes back to, you have to understand China's entry into the World Trade Organization. When there was a debate in Congress, most of the people at that time thought that engagement with China, bringing China into the WTO, would change China's behavior over time. That was a mistaken idea. I think in hindsight, most people understand that. There were a few people in Congress, though, that raised objections that were very clear-sighted. A couple that are still in Congress that your audience probably should know. One was Nancy Pelosi, of course, and she was known for her visit to Taiwan a few years ago that caused a bit of a stir. And then the other one is Congressman Chris Smith of New Jersey, who was first elected in 1980. And Chris Smith actually appointed me to the CECC. And I've worked for him in different foreign policy capacities for a number of years. But the idea behind the CECC was to focus on human rights and rule of law developments in China. So we were to hold China accountable. We publish an annual report that examines China's human rights record, its compliance with standards that are set forth in the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We also maintain a political prisoner database. And we hold hearings to inform Congress. And even though we're not we don't have legislative duties like a committee would have, like the Foreign Affairs Committee. Because of our structure, we have an interesting structure. We have two senators from the majority and the minority that are ranking members and other commissioners, and then two House of Representatives members that are majority and minority as well.
So it's bipartisan?
It's bipartisan. 5 from the majority from each the House and the Senate, 4 from the minority. And then because we're executive, we also have, when we're fully staffed, 5 commissioners from the executive branch as well. But because of that bipartisan, bicameral structure, the CECC and its members were responsible for some major legislation, including the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which is probably the most significant piece of legislation this century vis-a-vis China, Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. So it's, as folks may know, in order for a bill to become law, it has to pass both houses. So our structure really does help with that.
And you said that CECC is focused on human rights, and looking at current China's foreign policy and its ambitions worldwide, have the priorities shifted, and what are the top priorities right now of the CECC?
No, I mean, this is our legislative mandate, and sometimes people ask the question, why are human rights important? For aren't military, isn't that more important and whatever? But Ronald Reagan, I think, really was very clear-eyed. he understood that the question of human rights goes to legitimacy, regime legitimacy. And he really pressed the Soviet Union on it. You know, you're
Yes.
Polish and you know that too. And if you, it's another thing, you know, there's this Confucian idea of moral force or de. And if we look at the break, where did the crack in the Soviet Empire start? You know, Stalin once asked the question, how many divisions does the Pope have? Very dismissive about that, but you're Polish. And where did the break begin? It began with St. John Paul going to Poland. He had no military divisions, but he had moral force. And that changed the hearts and minds of the Polish people. It appealed to something in them. And it began really a wave that ultimately brought about the fall of the Soviet Empire. We're seeing something similar play out in Iran right now as well, and it's interesting. And I think the question that Beijing has to ask itself, well, what's going to happen here in China? That's important to keep that distinction between the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese people. Yeah. And what Taiwan has, I mean, it's very important that militarily, we can talk more about this, that Taiwan is able to deter China and makes it too costly. But what Taiwan does have is this idea of moral force. And sometimes, I get a little frustrated talking to people in Taiwan because the debates really are kind of very parochial. You got the KMT and the DPP are fighting each other all the time, and they should be thinking about the mainland. And how do you influence things there? Because in many ways, Taiwan's fate is tied up with the mainland. And there was a 2012 document that circulated in the upper echelons of the Chinese Communist Party called Document Number 9. And it coterminous with the rise of Xi Jinping. And document number 9 said a number of things. It said that human rights, it said that constitutionalism and rule of law, it said that democracy and direct popular elections all were alien to the Chinese tradition. Yeah. And Taiwan rebuts that. Even more when you think about it, in Taiwan's constitution, the ROC's constitution, with its 5 branches. Well, where do these 2 extra branches come from? That was Sun Yat-sen in the 1912 Constitution and again in the 1947 Constitution said that even during the imperial times, there was this idea of checks and balances. If you had this scholarly class that was trained in the Confucian classics, and they did serve as a check on the emperor. So even the structure of the ROC's constitution rebuts this notion. And I think that's very important. It's something also that the Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party fears. There was Li Keqiang, who was the premier, died under very mysterious circumstances. Do you know the last speech that he gave publicly before he retired? He had this expression, and if I use his exact words, please forgive me. Sometimes people will say, "Oh, 人在做，天在看." Well, his real words are 人在干，天在看, which sounds very harsh to a Taiwanese audience, but those were his words. Well, that idea of men acting and heaven watching is a very Confucian notion. Mencius talks about heaven sees with the eyes of the people, hears with the ears of the people. It's actually from the Shu Jing, the Book of Documents. This moral notion that judges, and that's also where Mencius talks about the mandate of heaven, Tianmin. Yeah. And he's asked the question, is it ever legitimate to overthrow a government and overthrow a king? And Mencius says, no, but it is legitimate to overthrow a tyrant and overthrow a tyranny. And I think that may have been what Xi Jinping heard, and why maybe Li Keqiang, as a lot of the Chinese internet speculation goes, may have met an untimely end. But it is important that even there in that intra-Communist Party dialogue, there is a notion to standards that heaven sets, a law above the law, which you can judge the actions of men. And in the case of Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party, it certainly has blood on its hands.
And even Xi Jinping himself, some years ago, he said, 头山三尺有神明，一定有敬畏之心.
Well, what's very interesting is that how often the Chinese Communist Party tries to usurp Confucianism and Confucian language. So Confucius Institutes, there's that TV show when Marx met Confucius to And part of that is because Confucianism traditionally gave legitimacy to the state. The DNA of the Chinese Communist Party is not Confucianism, it's legalism, fa jia.
Yeah.
But much in the same way that, Hanfeizi, exactly. But much in the same way that Christianity in the Roman Empire under first Constantine and really Theodosius legitimized then the empire, so too Confucianism has played that role. But if you look at the DNA, I'd say that the DNA of the Communist Party is, of course, Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, but also legalist. And whereas the notions of democracy you can have are really proto-democratic, you can see in Mencius and Confucianism there. So that's an asset that Taiwan has, a soft power asset.
Piero, you've just talked about Taiwan, and from the CECC's perspective, how has Taiwan featured in recent U.S. policy debates on China?
So, we had our first hearing this Congress last summer was on Stand with Taiwan. It was transnational repression that was directed at Taiwan. Taiwan's on the front line, and I think what we tell people is that Taiwan's national security is America's national security. It's part of the first island chain. Not only is it part of the first island chain, it's right there, front and center there. Japan, Philippines, all constitute part of that. But that really is where America's defense lies. So of course, Taiwan is going to be the target. In some ways, I've made this comparison point. You have a lot of Israel is attacked by a lot of Islamist groups, and it attracts that. Taiwan attracts the attention and all these resources of the People's Republic of China or the Chinese Communist Party. If Taiwan were to fall, that would have a direct impact on American national security. It is an integral part of the first island chain. I think our American foreign policy understands that. If you read the National Security Strategy memorandum, which is very short and to the point, I think it does emphasize that, and it should give assurance to people that maybe are a little bit skeptical about American intentions.
And right now there are very, very heated discussions in the Taiwanese parliament and Lifai Yuan, the legislative yuan, about the military budget.
Yeah.
And President Lai has suggested increasing the military spending, and right now this initiative is being blocked by the opposition parties. What do you think about the military budget allocation and the discussions that are right now within the Taiwan system?
Yeah, well, obviously it's very important that Taiwan has the weapons it needs to defend itself. President Trump has also announced a military weapons availability for Taiwan. I think we should keep it, and Taiwan should be reassured. What happened in Venezuela. One of the reasons I think Taiwan should be very optimistic about that is to show how China's vaunted air defense system and its early warning system completely failed Venezuela. You had the special envoy for Latin America, was it Chu Chi, I think, who was in Venezuela hours before that happened, reassuring Maduro of the importance of the Chinese-Venezuelan strategic relationship.
And the delegation hasn't left when Maduro got captured.
So it's, hello.
They were still there.
Yeah, they were still there. So that really, I think, sent an important message. And we want to see, there's that expression in si vis pacem para bellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. And that really, I think, is important. I know I saw Puma Shen has that saying on his
Kuma Academy.
And that idea, I think, is very important too. I think there's more that Taiwan can do in the area of civil defense that would help things. I think that one idea for Taiwan to consider is gun ownership and access to guns. If you really want a vigorous civil defense, I think that's an important debate to have. Democracies trust the people, and some of this is sort of residual from the Baisa Kongbu period, the martial law period, and it doesn't necessarily have to be an American Second Amendment model, but it could be something like a Swiss model where people have access to arms and train with them. Or even, maybe not even that, but just keeping it at the police stations. I think the police stations are part of that, resiliency program, but have been somewhat underutilized too.
Or maybe Czech model, because Czech people also have access to guns, and gun ownership is pretty high in Czech Republic.
Yeah. But also, I think when I first went to Taiwan, 1988, it was a very different Taiwan. It was a year after martial law had been lifted. And all Taiwanese men did 2 years military service, training, 2.5 if they were Marines. It was tough. And it really, I think over time, that decreased. So during Tsai Ing-wen's time, I mean, she increased it from, I think it was 3 months.
Back to 1 year.
To 1 year.
From 4 months to 1 year.
4 months, which is better, but I think more needs to be done. And it's that mindset of wanting to keep the peace. That's why we prepare. We take these preparations. But people, Taiwan is so precious. It really is. It's you've got something that's so unique and valuable. And for me, who first came here in 1988, after martial law was lifted, just to see that the evolution of democracy, constitutionalism, rule of law, respect for human rights over time, I think really is something, and it also messages the Chinese people. I mean, I do try to keep tabs on the Chinese internet and what they're saying, and just as you have in Iran now people talking about the Shah, you do have this. I don't want to overstate it, but you do have people that look back on the Republican period and say, oh, what might have been. We could be like Taiwan. So it's very important that Taiwan set the standard, set that example, not just for the people of Taiwan, but really for the people in China and for the people of the world too. Taiwan has a great example to share.
To become an inspiration.
To become an inspiration. We've worked with Taiwan on Somaliland. Taiwan has relations. Israel just recognized Somaliland. Taiwan doesn't have many friends at all in Africa, but in some ways, Taiwan could show a good governance model as to development there, in contrast to China's bad governance model. When I was last in Taiwan just before Christmas, we also met with the fisheries ministry. And China has such a bad record on IUU fishing, illegal, unlawful, unregulated fishing. Overfishing, and the way they treat the crew members, and also human rights abuses in the fish processing too. Unfortunately, that fish that's tainted with this forced labor makes its way onto American plates. Taiwan in the past didn't have a good record in that too, but it's made a lot of improvements, and that's one of the things we talked about too, how Taiwan could set the example. Things like, for example, having access to the internet on fishing boats so that crew members are not cut off. And I think there's been a lot of improvements there. So in many ways, Taiwan can set the standard, and that's incredibly important. The very fact that you have free and fair elections, and the Taiwanese really they love their elections too, and it's a very robust debate. There was that recall effort last year, and whatever you think about it, whether it was trying to do over the election, that what have you. There were a lot of flaws with it, but it also shows the robustness of exercising a constitutional provision and the debate around that. So even that, I think, is an example for mainland China.
And American foreign policy and overall the situation in the United States is a part of discussions within the Taiwanese society. Right now there is a wave of so-called Ameri-skepticism. People are doubting that the United States will protect Taiwan when push comes to shove. What do you have to say to these people?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, a PRC-influenced narrative, and I know when we withdrew from Afghanistan, that was kind of weaponized there. I think that the Taiwanese people should not doubt American resolve. I know there are some videos that Tony Hu that have circulated recently too, where I think should bolster Taiwanese people's confidence in the weaponry that we supply and the commitment there. I also think that what happened in Venezuela should bolster Taiwan's confidence. It really forces the CCP to think twice. And I think look at the national security strategy and read it and give it a fair read, because I think President Trump and his team are very, very much committed.
Taiwan is mentioned 8 times there.
Yes. I used to do work on Africa issues, and I was a little bit disappointed how little coverage was made of Africa. But Taiwan was really highlighted there, so it does give you some idea of how Taiwan really is a priority. And it's also an area that I think Republicans and Democrats have a lot of there's a lot of bipartisan support for Taiwan. We have delegations that go there very frequently. I mentioned Chris Smith and also Senator Sullivan, the current chair of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, very big Taiwan supporter.
From Alaska.
From Alaska, yeah. And also, American LNG, that's an important part in that. And one of the things, I was actually in Taiwan in July at a Ocean Affairs Ministry Forum, and one of the points that I made is that when Taiwan gets its energy, when it gets its LNG from the United States, whether Alaska, Louisiana, that also comes with a guarantee from the U.S. Navy. And so if and that's important. I think that's an area also I think where Taiwan needs to engage. It does need to have a sure and steady supply of energy. I know there are a lot of debates in Taiwan about energy and about nuclear energy, but I think some of that emerging nuclear technology, molten salt, small nuclear reactors, which is green energy, I think could really be an important factor in ensuring Taiwan's energy independence. Look, if Taiwan's going to be a leader in AI, in chip manufacturing, which it is, then it really, I think, needs those
it needs
stable.
Energy.
It needs energy.
That's
just the bottom line fact.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Piero. And from Taiwan, let's go back to China for a while.
Yeah, sure.
We have just discussed right now the language here in the United States. While mentioned in China, it's very reserved. People are not willing to call China a totalitarian country, still reserving to the more like authoritarian regime, this way of describing this country. What do you think about it? And should we just face the truth and call, like, if it walks like a duck, then it talks like a duck, then it probably is a duck.
Is a duck. Yeah, no, that's a very interesting question. As I actually spoke about that in December. Why are we afraid to call China a totalitarian country, and why do we call it an authoritarian country? And when did the language change? Well, the language started to change in the 1990s. 1989 was Tiananmen, and there was a consensus of the brutal nature of the communist regime. But it coincided with this engagement with China. And if you look at the difference between authoritarian regimes and totalitarian regimes, we should be clear about. Authoritarian regimes, if you confront the government, they'll come down on you. But they do leave a certain space, civic space, a religious space, entrepreneurial space. So if you look at if you look at the 1980s and 1990s, you had authoritarian regimes that matriculated into democracies: Spain, Chile, Philippines, Korea, and most importantly, Taiwan. Yeah. And if you look at even under the martial law period, there was a certain amount of freedom that was allowed people. In economics, as long as you didn't challenge one of the government monopolies, you could start businesses. Taiwanese, I remember when I first came here, very entrepreneurial. But also even in the church space, and it's interesting, if you look at the evolution of democracy in Taiwan, where do the Dangwai start.
Presbyterian Church.
Presbyterian Church, Zhang Laohui. And that really was instrumental. That became the Minjindang. And the role of the Presbyterian Church in fostering Taiwanese democracy. And if you look at the flag of the Minjindang, it still has a cross there. They superimpose the map of Taiwan on it. I guess so you don't confuse it with the flags of Scandinavian countries or something. But that connection is very, very real. Now, I think when our American companies wanted to start to do business with China, when Bill Clinton was very interesting. 1989, after Tiananmen, George H.W. Bush, the elder Bush, sent Brent Scowcroft to Beijing to reassure them that don't worry, we value our relations with you and trade relations. You know, they were at a weak point, and we bailed them out. And Bill Clinton rightfully criticized George H.W. Bush as coddling butchers from Beijing to Baghdad. But then what did he do? He delinked trade and human rights. We used to go through an annual process there. And it was, again, Chris Smith and Nancy Pelosi that had a lot of foresight to criticize President Clinton for doing that. That's, I think, when the language started to change, because if you're dealing with an authoritarian regime, then, you know, by trading with them, you can make them, quote unquote, more like us, and that was that. But if you look at all the hallmarks, and Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote a book in the 1950s. He was Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, much more clear-eyed there than his predecessors. It's run by one party. It has an ideology. It's a totalitarian ideology. People say, well, they don't control the economy. Well, they set the limits. I mean, look at Jack Ma. Jack Ma, you know, this great billionaire, when he contradicted the party, he disappeared for a period. Yeah, they control the media and the narrative there. So really, if you go through these check marks, it is a totalitarian country and a totalitarian regime there, and that regime is the Chinese Communist Party. And at the end of the day, they're still communists. And I think people need to be very clear-eyed about that. You know, when I first came here in 1988, the Kuomintang was very clear-eyed. I remember the presidential, the executive building would have these big character posters, 反共必胜, the victory over communism will succeed.
It will prevail, yeah.
It will prevail, yeah. And that mindset, I think, was very clear. You know, Chiang Kai-shek was very clear about the nature of communism. I think that understanding and that skepticism of mainland China and the communist regime needs to really come back, because that puts things in focus.
Thank you so much. And thank you for agreeing to take part in today's interview. And for everyone, you can go to the CECC's website and look at the latest initiatives and about the current directions of the U.S.-China policy. Thank you, Piero.
Thank you. Thank you.